Imagine standing at the crossroads of philosophy, religion, and personal transformation, where every question about divinity leads not outward but inward. What if the concept of God wasn't bound by the idea of a supreme creator but instead unfolded through the intimate act of understanding yourself? This is the radical departure that Buddhism offers, a path not defined by faith in an omnipotent being but by a profound exploration of suffering, impermanence, and liberation. In a world where theological debates often dominate the conversation about spirituality, Buddhism takes a refreshingly different approach. It neither confirms nor denies the existence of a supreme deity, instead directing our attention to the root of all human struggles and the means to transcend them. Imagine a philosophy that asks not who made the universe, but how can we escape the suffering within it. A philosophy that encourages us to let go of attachment, cultivate mindfulness, and embrace the interconnected nature of life. But does this mean Buddhism rejects the idea of God altogether? Does it dismiss the divine, or does it redefine it in a way that transcends conventional thinking? In today's exploration, we'll unravel the complexities of Buddhist thought on divinity. Along the way, we'll delve into the ancient wisdom of dependent origination, the role of celestial beings in Buddhist cosmology, and the Buddhist profound focus on self-reliance and inner transformation. Through captivating stories, timeless teachings, and modern reflections, we'll uncover how Buddhism offers not just a spiritual path but a transformative way of seeing the world. Whether you're deeply religious, agnostic, or simply curious, the Buddhist perspective invites you to rethink divinity, not as an external force but as an opportunity to awaken the divine potential within. So, settle in and prepare for a journey through the profound teachings of the Buddha, a journey that promises to challenge, inspire, and perhaps even transform the way you think about God, spirituality, and the nature of existence. Part 1. Understanding Buddhism's approach to divinity. Understanding Buddhism's approach to divinity requires a shift in perspective, especially for those familiar with religions that place a supreme deity at the center of their practices. Unlike these theistic traditions, Buddhism provides a fundamentally practical and experiential framework. Rather than centering on devotion to an almighty creator, it focuses on addressing the human condition, specifically, the reality of suffering and how to overcome it. This pragmatic outlook can be summarized in one of the Buddha's most famous statements: "I teach only two things, suffering and the cessation of suffering." This simple yet profound declaration reveals the heart of Buddhist teachings, which prioritize liberation from suffering over metaphysical or theological speculation. This distinctive approach, however, does not necessarily reject the existence of God or gods. Instead, Buddhism reframes the concept of divinity by shifting its focus from external worship to inner transformation. While the Buddha never explicitly denied the existence of gods or divine beings, he consistently emphasized that the path to enlightenment and ultimate freedom lies in understanding and overcoming the root causes of suffering. This is achieved through cultivating mindfulness, ethical living, and wisdom, not through submission or devotion to a higher power. By doing so, Buddhism encourages self-reliance and the cultivation of personal insight as the foundation for spiritual progress. In Buddhism, the absence of a supreme creator deity is not an act of denial or negation but a conscious redirection of spiritual inquiry. Rather than debating the existence or characteristics of a divine being, Buddhism urges individuals to focus on their own experiences and actions. The teachings are rooted in the belief that human suffering is the result of internal causes, namely craving, ignorance, and attachment, rather than external forces. This outlook not only empowers practitioners to take responsibility for their own spiritual journeys but also eliminates the need for reliance on divine intervention. The path to liberation is not seen as a gift bestowed by a god, but as a process of personal transformation, one that every individual is capable of achieving through effort and discipline. This perspective is deeply interwoven with the Buddhist understanding of interdependence and causality. By emphasizing these principles, Buddhism avoids the binary frameworks of theistic belief and atheistic rejection. It neither depends on the existence of a god nor discredits the possibility of divine or supernatural elements. Instead, it redefines spirituality as a journey of self-discovery, rooted in practical action and direct experience. For instance, the emphasis on self-reliance is encapsulated in the Buddha's famous instruction to his followers, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This teaching encourages individuals to seek truth and liberation within themselves rather than depending on external entities, whether divine or otherwise. By taking this unique approach, Buddhism provides an inclusive and accessible path for people from a variety of spiritual and philosophical backgrounds. It does not require adherence to specific dogmas or belief systems but instead invites practitioners to explore universal truths about suffering, impermanence, and the nature of existence. This openness allows Buddhism to resonate with individuals who may identify as atheists, agnostics, or followers of other religious traditions. At its core, Buddhism's approach to divinity is not about worshipping a deity but about recognizing the interconnectedness of all life and the potential for awakening that lies within every individual. This reframing of divinity also reflects the Buddha's pragmatic orientation. His teachings consistently prioritize practical wisdom over speculative or abstract thought. For example, when asked about metaphysical questions such as whether the universe is eternal or finite, the Buddha famously remained silent. This silence was not an admission of ignorance but a deliberate refusal to engage in discussions that did not directly contribute to the path of liberation. By steering clear of theological debates, the Buddha underscored the importance of focusing on what truly matters, understanding the nature of suffering and taking actionable steps to transcend it. Through this lens, the Buddhist approach to divinity can be seen as both transformative and liberating. It frees practitioners from the need to reconcile conflicting theological claims or to seek salvation through external sources. Instead, it directs attention inward, encouraging individuals to confront their own suffering, investigate its causes, and cultivate the qualities needed to overcome it. By doing so, Buddhism offers a spiritual framework that is not only deeply personal but also profoundly universal, addressing the shared human experience of pain and the longing for freedom. As we delve deeper into Buddhist teachings, it becomes clear that this approach to divinity is not a rejection of spirituality but a redefinition of its purpose. The Buddha's emphasis on self-reliance and inner transformation challenges conventional notions of divinity, inviting us to reconsider what it means to live a meaningful and liberated life. In doing so, Buddhism provides a timeless path that transcends cultural and religious boundaries, offering insights that are as relevant today as they were over 2,500 years ago. Part 2: Parables that clarify the Buddhist perspective. Buddhism's approach to divinity becomes clearer when examined through the lens of the Buddha's parables and teachings. These stories, rather than presenting abstract theological arguments, offer practical insights that guide individuals toward enlightenment. The Buddha understood that human beings are naturally curious about metaphysical matters, questions about the origins of the universe, the existence of a creator, and the nature of divinity. However, he also recognized that these inquiries, while intellectually stimulating, often serve as distractions from the real work of spiritual liberation. Instead of engaging in speculative debates, he emphasized the importance of direct experience and the application of wisdom in everyday life. One of the most famous parables illustrating this perspective is the story of the poisoned arrow. In this analogy, a man is struck by a poisoned arrow, but instead of seeking immediate medical attention, he demands to know who shot it. He asks about the archer's cast, the type of bow that was used, the material of the arrowhead, and other details that have no bearing on his immediate condition. The Buddha used this story to highlight the futility of engaging in metaphysical speculation while suffering persists. Just as the wounded man's priority should be to remove the arrow and receive treatment, a spiritual seeker's primary focus should be on understanding suffering and finding a way to transcend it. This parable is not a dismissal of intellectual curiosity but rather a strategic redirection of focus. The Buddha was not interested in theological arguments that led nowhere. He was concerned with what could lead to real transformation. When asked about the existence of a creator God, he neither affirmed nor denied it. Instead, he pointed out that such a debate was irrelevant to the path of liberation. The question is not whether a God exists but whether belief in such a being helps or hinders the pursuit of enlightenment. The poisoned arrow parable demonstrates that engaging in endless discussions about divinity, rather than focusing on the causes of suffering and the methods for overcoming it, is like refusing to remove the arrow while arguing about its origins. The practicality of this teaching is reflected in Buddhism's core principles, particularly the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. The Four Noble Truths provide a clear diagnosis of human suffering. Suffering exists, suffering has a cause, suffering can end, and there is a path to its cessation. These truths do not rely on divine intervention but on personal understanding and effort. The Eightfold Path, which includes ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom, offers a concrete roadmap for achieving liberation. By following this path, individuals learn to overcome craving, ignorance, and attachment to true sources of suffering. Another parable that reinforces this perspective is the story of the man searching for fire. Imagine someone trying to start a fire by rubbing sticks together. Instead of focusing on the task, he wonders about the nature of fire itself, its color, its origin, and whether it exists independently. Meanwhile, he fails to generate any warmth or light. The Buddha likened this to those who become lost in theological speculation rather than focusing on the immediate goal of liberation. The search for truth, in the Buddhist sense, is not about defining or proving the existence of a higher power but about realizing the impermanence of all things and cultivating wisdom that leads to inner peace. This practical orientation is what makes Buddhism so distinct. It does not require faith in a God but rather confidence in one's ability to transform suffering into wisdom. Even in Buddhist traditions that include celestial beings, such as Mahayana Buddhism's concept of bodhisattvas, these figures are not seen as omnipotent deities but as compassionate guides. The focus remains on personal responsibility and the recognition that enlightenment is attainable through practice and insight rather than divine favor. Additionally, the Buddha's reluctance to engage in speculative metaphysics is evident in his famous silence on the unanswerable questions. When asked whether the universe is eternal or finite, whether the soul exists after death, or whether there is a supreme deity, he refused to give definitive answers. His silence was not due to ignorance but because he understood that these questions do not lead to enlightenment. They are distractions, much like the poisoned arrow. The real question is not whether a God exists but whether one's actions and mindset are leading toward or away from suffering. This perspective aligns with Buddhism's emphasis on self-reliance. The idea that one's salvation does not depend on divine intervention but on personal effort is central to Buddhist teachings. This is why the Buddha encouraged his followers to test his teachings through personal experience rather than accepting them blindly. Faith in Buddhism is not faith in a deity but faith in the Dharma, the path itself. This experiential approach resonates with modern spiritual seekers who appreciate its emphasis on direct knowledge over dogmatic belief. By shifting focus away from theological debates, Buddhism remains relevant across cultures and time periods. While other religions may define spirituality in terms of devotion to a deity, Buddhism defines it as the cultivation of wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. The teachings invite individuals to see reality as it is, to recognize the impermanence of all things, and to break free from suffering through their own efforts. The poisoned arrow parable and similar teachings illustrate that Buddhism is not concerned with rejecting or affirming a deity but with transcending the question entirely. It is not about proving or disproving God, it is about understanding suffering, impermanence, and the path to liberation. This emphasis on practical wisdom over speculative thought is what has allowed Buddhism to endure and remain accessible to people from all walks of life. Rather than looking outward for salvation, Buddhism directs attention inward, urging individuals to become their own refuge, to cultivate insight, and to walk the path of awakening with clarity and purpose. Part 3. The role of devas and divine beings in Buddhism. Buddhism's approach to divinity becomes even more nuanced when examining the role of devas, celestial beings who exist within the Buddhist cosmological framework but are fundamentally different from the omnipotent gods found in many theistic traditions. Unlike a creator deity who governs the universe, devas are seen as powerful yet impermanent beings who, like humans, remain subject to the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara. This distinction highlights Buddhism's unique perspective on divinity. While celestial realms exist, they are not ultimate destinations, nor do the beings inhabiting them possess the power to grant enlightenment. Instead, true liberation comes only through wisdom, ethical conduct, and self-realization. The presence of devas in Buddhist teachings serves multiple purposes. First, it acknowledges the vastness of existence beyond the human realm, offering a cosmology that includes higher and lower realms shaped by karma. Second, it demonstrates that even beings who seem superior to humans, whether in power, longevity, or status, are still bound by the same fundamental truths of impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. This understanding prevents the deification of devas as ultimate authorities and instead positions them as fellow travelers in the cycle of samsara, facing the same existential challenges as humans. A striking example of this perspective is the story of Sakya, the king of the devas. In Buddhist texts, Sakya is depicted as a celestial ruler residing in the Tavatimsa heaven, a realm of great pleasure and joy. However, despite his power and prestige, Sakya remains subject to the workings of karma and is far from attaining enlightenment. Recognizing his own limitations, he approaches the Buddha for guidance, humbly seeking wisdom to progress on the path of liberation. This interaction is significant because it underscores a key Buddhist teaching: no matter how powerful or exalted a being may be, true freedom is found only through the Dharma. This story challenges the common assumption that divine beings hold ultimate authority over human fate. Instead of presenting devas as omnipotent or infallible, Buddhism portrays them as sentient beings who, despite their high status, remain vulnerable to ignorance and attachment. Even the greatest celestial beings, like Sakya, must ultimately walk the path of the Dharma to transcend samsara. This emphasis on self-reliance and personal transformation is a central theme in Buddhist philosophy, reinforcing the idea that salvation cannot be granted externally but must be cultivated from within. The role of devas in Buddhism also serves to illustrate the impermanent and ever-changing nature of existence. While the devas may reside in blissful realms for eons, they are not exempt from the effects of karma. Their positive past actions may have led to their current divine status, but once their merit is exhausted, they too must face rebirth in lower realms. This cyclical nature of existence reinforces the Buddhist understanding that no state, no matter how pleasurable, is eternal. Even celestial realms are ultimately transient, reinforcing the importance of seeking lasting liberation rather than temporary pleasures. This perspective is further exemplified in the story of Mara, often referred to as a deva associated with illusion and temptation. Unlike Sakya, who aspires to wisdom, Mara represents the forces of delusion and attachment that bind beings to samsara. According to Buddhist texts, Mara attempted to obstruct the Buddha's enlightenment by sending his daughters to seduce him, creating terrifying illusions, and questioning his resolve. However, the Buddha, having cultivated deep wisdom and unwavering mindfulness, saw through these illusions and remained undisturbed. This confrontation illustrates a core Buddhist teaching: liberation requires overcoming inner obstacles, rather than seeking external salvation. Mara is not an independent evil force but a representation of our own doubts, fears, and attachments. The interaction between the Buddha and Mara also underscores the Buddhist rejection of dualistic battles between good and evil. Unlike some religious traditions that frame spiritual struggles as cosmic battles between divine and demonic forces, Buddhism portrays these challenges as internal conflicts that must be resolved through insight and self-discipline. This subtle yet profound distinction highlights Buddhism's emphasis on personal responsibility and the transformative power of inner wisdom. Beyond devas and Mara, the Mahayana Buddhist tradition introduces the concept of bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who, out of boundless compassion, choose to delay their own final liberation in order to assist others on the path. Figures like Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, and Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, play significant roles in inspiring practitioners. However, even these exalted figures are not considered gods in a traditional sense. Rather than existing as external saviors, bodhisattvas serve as archetypes embodying the virtues that practitioners should cultivate within themselves. This reinforces the idea that the qualities often attributed to divine beings, wisdom, compassion, and enlightenment, are not external forces but inherent potentials within each individual. This non-theistic yet deeply spiritual framework allows Buddhism to maintain an inclusive and adaptable approach to divinity. For those drawn to devotional practices, figures like Sakya, Avalokiteshvara, and even historical Buddhists serve as sources of inspiration. However, for those who prefer a secular or philosophical interpretation, Buddhism's core teachings remain entirely applicable without reliance on supernatural elements. This flexibility has contributed to Buddhism's enduring appeal across cultures and historical periods. The role of devas and divine beings in Buddhism ultimately reinforces a key theme: no external power, no matter how great, can provide ultimate liberation. True freedom comes from insight, ethical conduct, and mindfulness. While devas may serve as reminders of karma's workings and the potential for higher states of existence, they are not to be mistaken for omnipotent gods. Instead, their presence in Buddhist cosmology highlights the universal law of impermanence and the necessity of walking the path of wisdom. Thus, Buddhism does not reject the existence of divine beings but redefines their role, positioning them not as saviors but as fellow beings navigating the intricate web of cause and effect. This perspective shifts the focus from external worship to internal transformation, encouraging individuals to cultivate their own potential for awakening. Whether one engages with Buddhism from a devotional standpoint or a philosophical one, the message remains clear: enlightenment is not something given but something realized. Part 4. Dependent origination and the absence of a creator deity. Buddhism's approach to divinity becomes even clearer when examined through the lens of dependent origination, pratyasamutpita, one of the most fundamental teachings in Buddhist philosophy. Unlike theistic traditions that attribute the existence of the universe to a singular, omnipotent creator, Buddhism presents a radically different perspective, one that is based on causality, interdependence, and the rejection of inherent, independent existence. The principle of dependent origination posits that all phenomena arise due to specific causes and conditions, meaning that nothing exists in isolation or as a self-sufficient entity. This understanding challenges the notion of an eternal, unchanging divine creator, instead emphasizing a reality that is in constant flux, shaped by the interdependent relationships between all things. The implications of dependent origination extend far beyond metaphysics. They form the very foundation of Buddhist thought and practice. By understanding that everything arises due to conditions, Buddhism removes the need for a supernatural being responsible for creation, judgment, or salvation. The universe, according to this view, is not the result of divine will but an intricate web of causes and effects. Every event, every action, and every moment is a consequence of prior conditions, reinforcing the idea that reality is not dictated by a higher power but by natural laws. This understanding places the responsibility for suffering and liberation squarely in the hands of the individual, a concept that is at the heart of Buddhist teachings. The Buddha himself emphasized this principle in many of his discourses, teaching that suffering does not originate from divine punishment or fate but from ignorance and craving. In the famous Buddhist chain of causation, also known as the 12 links of dependent origination. He outlined how suffering arises step by step due to specific causes. This process begins with ignorance, avijja, which leads to volitional formations, sakra, consciousness, vaya, and so on, culminating in birth, aging, and death. The cycle repeats endlessly, trapping beings in samsara, the cycle of rebirth. However, just as suffering arises due to conditions, it can also be brought to an end by eliminating ignorance and craving. This is where Buddhism departs most significantly from theistic worldviews. Rather than placing faith in an external deity to grant salvation, practitioners are encouraged to cultivate wisdom and insight to break free from suffering themselves. This emphasis on self-reliance is further reinforced by the Buddhist statement, "By oneself is one purified, by oneself is one defiled." No one can purify another. Unlike many religious traditions that advocate for divine grace, intercession, or atonement, Buddhism teaches that spiritual progress depends solely on one's own efforts. There is no God to forgive sins, no external force to cleanse the soul. Only the individual's own thoughts, actions, and understanding can lead to liberation. This concept can be both liberating and daunting. It removes the comfort of an omnipotent being guiding human destiny, but also empowers individuals to take full control of their spiritual path. The absence of a creator deity in Buddhism is not a simple negation but a reframing of spiritual responsibility. Rather than relying on faith in a higher power, practitioners are encouraged to observe reality as it is and cultivate the qualities needed for liberation. This aligns with the scientific and rational nature of Buddhist thought, making it highly compatible with modern understandings of the world. The Buddhist worldview does not require belief in an absolute creator. Instead, it invites individuals to investigate the nature of existence through personal experience. This approach is reflected in the Buddha's Kalama Sutta, where he advises seekers not to accept teachings based on tradition, authority, or scripture alone but to test them against direct experience and reason. Another key teaching that underscores the absence of a creator deity is anatta, or non-self. This doctrine asserts that there is no permanent, independent self, only a continuous process of change. Just as individual identity is a product of transient conditions, the universe itself is not governed by a fixed, eternal being. The notion of a creator presupposes a singular, unchanging entity that exists independently of time and space. However, this concept is fundamentally incompatible with Buddhist teachings, which recognize impermanence, anicca, as a defining characteristic of reality. If everything is in a constant state of flux, then the idea of an unchanging God becomes illogical within the Buddhist framework. Furthermore, the concept of karma plays a crucial role in shaping Buddhist cosmology. Unlike theistic religions where divine will determines human fate, Buddhism teaches that actions, karma, and their consequences govern the course of existence. This law of moral causation operates without the need for a divine judge or ruler. Instead, every thought, word, and action naturally produces results according to ethical principles. Good deeds lead to positive outcomes, while harmful actions lead to suffering, not because of divine intervention but because of the natural mechanics of cause and effect. This karmic law replaces the need for a God who rewards or punishes, reinforcing the Buddhist emphasis on ethical responsibility. The absence of a creator deity in Buddhism does not mean that it is devoid of spiritual depth. On the contrary, by shifting focus from external worship to internal transformation, Buddhism offers a profound and practical path to awakening. Many practitioners find great spiritual fulfillment in the teachings of impermanence, interdependence, and non-attachment. Rather than seeking divine approval, they cultivate mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, qualities that lead to liberation. This experiential approach to spirituality allows Buddhism to resonate with people from various backgrounds, including those who may not identify as religious but seek deeper understanding of existence. Interestingly, The Buddhist rejection of an omnipotent creator aligns with many modern scientific and philosophical perspectives. The idea that the universe functions through interconnected causes and conditions is remarkably similar to theories in physics, biology, and systems thinking. In contemporary discussions, scholars have noted parallels between dependent origination and concepts in quantum mechanics, ecology, and neuroscience. These connections highlight the timeless relevance of the Buddha's insights, demonstrating that his teachings are not only applicable to spiritual seekers but also to those who explore reality through a scientific lens. Despite its non-theistic framework, Buddhism does not take an aggressively atheistic stance. It does not concern itself with disproving the existence of God but rather with transcending the question altogether. The Buddha's reluctance to engage in theological speculation is well documented. When asked whether the universe is finite or infinite, eternal or created, he remained silent, recognizing that such inquiries do not contribute to the path of enlightenment. This echoes the wisdom of the poisoned arrow parable, in which he teaches that dwelling on metaphysical debates is like a wounded man refusing medical treatment until he knows every detail about the arrow that struck him. The urgent task is not to unravel the mysteries of creation but to remove the causes of suffering. Thus, the Buddhist rejection of a creator deity is not rooted in denial but in a deeper understanding of interdependence. The teachings encourage practitioners to look beyond external forces and recognize their own role in shaping reality. By understanding dependent origination, individuals gain insight into how their thoughts, actions, and intentions create the conditions for their future experiences. This perspective replaces faith in divine will with an empowered sense of agency, making Buddhism a deeply transformative and self-sustaining path. This emphasis on causality over divine intervention is one of the reasons Buddhism has remained relevant across cultures and historical periods. Whether in ancient India or the modern world, its teachings appeal to those who seek a rational yet deeply spiritual approach to life. The message is clear: enlightenment is not a gift from the gods, nor is it predetermined by fate. It is something that each individual must cultivate through understanding, discipline, and inner work. In this way, Buddhism offers a vision of spiritual progress that is independent of divine authority, yet profoundly meaningful in its exploration of human potential. Part 5: Personal Reflections and Modern Interpretations. Buddhism's approach to divinity continues to evolve in contemporary discourse, adapting to various cultural and philosophical contexts. Unlike many religious traditions that require belief in a specific deity or divine being, Buddhism offers a broad and flexible framework that allows individuals to interpret spirituality in ways that align with their personal experiences and worldviews. This adaptability is one of the key reasons Buddhism has remained relevant across centuries, finding resonance not only with devout practitioners but also with secular thinkers, scientists, and spiritual seekers who may not subscribe to theistic beliefs. For many, Buddhism provides a way to engage with profound existential and ethical questions without requiring adherence to a traditional concept of God. Some interpret divinity as a metaphor for the interconnectedness of all life, an expression of ultimate truth rather than a distinct supernatural being. Others see Buddhist practice as a means of self-cultivation, emphasizing mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom rather than external worship. This diversity of interpretation allows Buddhism to appeal to a wide range of individuals, from those who identify with religious traditions to those who approach spirituality from a more philosophical or scientific perspective. One of the most well-known figures who has contributed to modern interpretations of Buddhist spirituality is Thich Nhat Hanh. His teachings present nirvana not as a distant, supernatural state but as the ground of being, a profound realization of interdependence and freedom. Rather than viewing enlightenment as an escape from reality, he describes it as a deep understanding of the present moment, one that dissolves the illusion of separation between self and world. This perspective aligns with the core Buddhist principle of anatta, or non-self, which teaches that the sense of an independent, isolated self is an illusion sustained by ignorance and attachment. Through mindfulness and insight, one can awaken to the reality of interbeing, the interconnected nature of all things. Similarly, the Dalai Lama has been a vocal advocate for integrating Buddhist wisdom with scientific inquiry, particularly in the fields of neuroscience, quantum physics, and psychology. He often emphasizes that Buddhist practice is not about blind faith but about direct experience and rational analysis. His collaborations with scientists and researchers have led to fascinating discussions on the nature of consciousness, the effects of meditation on the brain, and the parallels between Buddhist teachings on impermanence and modern physics. By engaging with contemporary scientific thought, the Dalai Lama highlights the ways in which Buddhism offers valuable insights that complement, rather than contradict, modern understandings of reality. These contemporary perspectives demonstrate Buddhism's ability to transcend cultural and religious boundaries, making its teachings accessible to people from diverse backgrounds. Unlike religious traditions that require submission to divine authority, Buddhism encourages inquiry and personal exploration. This is particularly appealing to those who seek a spiritual path that aligns with critical thinking and experiential learning. In this way, Buddhism provides a middle ground between faith-based religious traditions and purely secular philosophies, offering a form of spirituality that is both practical and deeply transformative. In addition to its philosophical depth, Buddhism has gained widespread popularity in modern society due to its emphasis on mindfulness and mental well-being. The rise of mindfulness meditation, particularly in Western countries, has introduced millions of people to Buddhist-derived practices without requiring them to adopt Buddhist religious beliefs. Mindfulness, originally a core component of Buddhist meditation, has been embraced in psychology, healthcare, and even corporate settings as a tool for stress reduction, emotional regulation, and overall well-being. While some practitioners engage with mindfulness purely as a secular practice, others find that it opens the door to deeper explorations of Buddhist philosophy. One of the reasons Buddhism resonates so strongly with modern individuals is its focus on self-reliance. In a world where traditional religious structures are increasingly questioned, Buddhism offers an alternative that does not depend on divine intervention. Instead of looking to an external savior, practitioners are encouraged to take responsibility for their own actions, cultivate ethical behavior, and develop insight through meditation and study. This emphasis on personal agency is particularly relevant in an era where people seek meaning and fulfillment outside of conventional religious frameworks. At the same time, Buddhism does not entirely dismiss the value of devotional practices. Many Mahayana traditions, for instance, incorporate elements of faith and devotion, particularly in the veneration of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. However, even in these traditions, devotion is not about submission to a higher power but about cultivating qualities such as compassion, wisdom, and patience. Figures like Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, serve as archetypes that inspire practitioners to develop these virtues within themselves. This approach allows Buddhism to accommodate a wide range of spiritual temperaments, from those drawn to a more devotional practice to those who prefer a purely philosophical or meditative approach. Another significant aspect of Buddhism's modern interpretation is its ethical framework, which remains highly relevant in contemporary discussions on morality, environmental sustainability, and social justice. The principle of ahimsa, or non-harming, has influenced movements advocating for animal rights, environmental conservation, and nonviolent activism. The Buddhist emphasis on interdependence encourages a sense of global responsibility, reminding individuals that their actions affect not only themselves but the entire web of life. This ethical dimension provides a compelling reason for many people to engage with Buddhism, even if they do not identify as religious. Despite its adaptability, Buddhism has also faced challenges in modernity. The commercialization of mindfulness, for example, has led to concerns that core Buddhist teachings are being diluted or misrepresented. Some critics argue that the secularization of meditation practices strips them of their ethical and philosophical depth. reducing them to mere tools for personal productivity rather than genuine paths to wisdom. This tension highlights an ongoing debate within contemporary Buddhism: how to preserve the integrity of its teachings while making them accessible to a global audience. Ultimately, Buddhism's flexibility is one of its greatest strengths. Whether approached as a religion, a philosophy, or a way of life, its teachings continue to offer profound insights into the nature of suffering, the impermanence of all things, and the path to liberation. By emphasizing self-inquiry, ethical responsibility, and direct experience, Buddhism remains a powerful and relevant spiritual tradition that speaks to the complexities of modern existence. Its ability to bridge ancient wisdom with contemporary thought ensures that it will continue to inspire and guide seekers for generations to come. Part 6: Real-Life Lessons and Stories. Buddhism's capacity to evolve and adapt has allowed it to maintain its relevance across centuries, and in the modern world, its interpretations of divinity continue to resonate with diverse audiences. Unlike many religious traditions that define God as an external, omnipotent being, Buddhism allows for multiple perspectives on divinity, ranging from metaphorical representations of ultimate truth to a complete absence of theistic belief. This flexibility makes it appealing to a wide range of individuals, from spiritual seekers looking for deeper meaning to those who approach Buddhism as a secular philosophy rooted in mindfulness and ethical living. One of the reasons Buddhism has remained relevant in contemporary society is its emphasis on direct experience over blind faith. The Buddha himself encouraged his followers to test his teachings through personal investigation rather than accepting them on authority. This scientific and empirical approach aligns closely with modern intellectual traditions, making Buddhism particularly attractive to those who seek a rational yet deeply meaningful spiritual path. Many practitioners interpret Buddhist teachings on divinity not as descriptions of supernatural beings but as symbolic expressions of fundamental truths about existence. For some, God in the Buddhist context is not a personal deity but a representation of interconnectedness, the vast, ever-changing web of dependent origination that shapes all things. Thich Nhat Hanh, a highly influential Vietnamese Zen master, presents one of the most widely accepted modern interpretations of nirvana. He describes it as the ground of being, not as supernatural paradise but a state of ultimate understanding and freedom. In his view, enlightenment is not about escaping to another world but about fully awakening to the nature of reality as it is. He emphasizes that when one deeply realizes the impermanence and interdependence of all things, suffering dissolves, and a sense of profound peace arises. This interpretation allows Buddhism to bridge the gap between traditional spiritual understandings and modern existential philosophy, providing a sense of transcendence without requiring belief in a deity. Similarly, the Dalai Lama has played a crucial role in reshaping modern perceptions of Buddhism by highlighting its compatibility with science, particularly in the fields of neuroscience, psychology, and quantum physics. He frequently discusses how Buddhist meditation practices align with contemporary studies on consciousness, demonstrating that Buddhism's insights into the mind and reality are not merely abstract religious doctrines but practical, verifiable truths. He argues that the principles of impermanence and dependent origination are consistent with modern physics, which describes reality as a dynamic interplay of interdependent forces rather than a static creation governed by an external intelligence. This scientific openness distinguishes Buddhism from many religious traditions that rely on fixed dogmas about creation, divinity, and the afterlife. Instead of clashing with modernity, Buddhism embraces change, encouraging practitioners to refine their understanding based on new discoveries. This adaptability is a key reason why many atheists and agnostics find value in Buddhist teachings. Unlike theistic traditions that require belief in a supreme being, Buddhism allows individuals to engage in spiritual practice without needing to accept metaphysical claims about divine intervention. Its teachings on mindfulness, compassion, and ethical responsibility resonate with those who seek a meaningful way to navigate life without relying on supernatural explanations. At the same time, Buddhism does not reject devotional or symbolic interpretations of divinity. Many practitioners, particularly within Mahayana traditions, find inspiration in bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who delay their own final liberation to assist others on the path. Figures like Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, and Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, serve as archetypes representing the highest aspirations of the human spirit. Unlike gods in theistic traditions, bodhisattvas do not act as omnipotent rulers or creators. Instead, they embody the virtues that practitioners strive to cultivate within themselves. This allows Buddhism to accommodate those who find meaning in devotional practices while maintaining its core emphasis on personal responsibility and inner transformation. In many ways, the Buddhist understanding of divinity reflects the broader philosophical shift in modern spirituality. As traditional religious structures decline in influence, more people seek frameworks that emphasize inner growth, ethical living, and interconnectedness without requiring adherence to rigid belief systems. Buddhism provides an alternative that is both deeply spiritual and intellectually satisfying, offering practices that enhance well-being while encouraging critical inquiry. This balance between faith and reason makes it one of the most accessible and relevant spiritual traditions in contemporary society. One of the most significant modern developments in Buddhism is the rise of mindfulness as a secular practice. Originally a core component of Buddhist meditation, mindfulness has been integrated into psychology, healthcare, and even corporate culture as a tool for reducing stress, increasing focus, and improving emotional well-being. While this mainstream adoption has helped bring Buddhist practices to a wider audience, it has also sparked debates within Buddhist communities about the potential dilution of its deeper teachings. Some argue that the commercialization of mindfulness has stripped it of its ethical and philosophical foundations, turning it into a productivity tool rather than a path to enlightenment. However, others see it as an opportunity to introduce Buddhist principles to people who might not otherwise engage with spiritual practice, offering an entry point for deeper exploration. Beyond mindfulness, Buddhism's ethical framework has also gained recognition for its relevance to contemporary social and environmental issues. The principle of ahimsa, or non-harming, has inspired movements advocating for environmental sustainability, animal rights, and social justice. The Buddhist understanding of interdependence encourages a sense of responsibility toward the planet and all living beings, aligning with modern ecological and ethical concerns. Many engaged Buddhist movements, such as those led by Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama, emphasize compassionate activism, demonstrating that spiritual practice is not separate from social responsibility but deeply intertwined with it. Another way Buddhism continues to evolve in modern times is through interfaith dialogue. The Dalai Lama, in particular, has emphasized the importance of mutual respect and understanding among different religious traditions. He often states that while Buddhism may not be the right path for everyone, its principles can still offer valuable insights to people of all faiths. This open-minded approach has helped Buddhism gain respect and influence beyond its traditional cultural boundaries, fostering collaboration between religious leaders, scientists, and philosophers in discussions on consciousness, morality, and the nature of reality. Despite its broad appeal, Buddhism also faces challenges in adapting to contemporary society. The rapid spread of information through digital media has led to both an increased interest in Buddhist teachings and a proliferation of superficial or misleading interpretations. Many people encounter Buddhism through social media snippets or self-help books that emphasize its psychological benefits while neglecting its deeper ethical and philosophical dimensions. This has led some scholars and traditional practitioners to express concerns about the risk of reducing Buddhism to a mere self-improvement strategy, stripped of its original depth and transformative potential. Nonetheless, Buddhism's ability to remain flexible while maintaining its core principles is a testament to its enduring relevance. Whether interpreted as a religious tradition, a philosophical system, or a way of life, it continues to offer profound insights into the nature of suffering, impermanence, and liberation. For some, it provides a structured spiritual path with rituals and devotional elements. For others, It serves as a practical guide for ethical living and mental clarity. This inclusivity allows Buddhism to thrive in diverse cultural contexts, adapting to new challenges while preserving its essential wisdom. As Buddhism moves further into the 21st century, its role in shaping global spirituality will likely continue to expand. With increasing scientific validation of meditation's benefits, a growing awareness of the need for ethical and sustainable living, and a widespread desire for deeper meaning in a rapidly changing world, Buddhist teachings remain as relevant as ever. By emphasizing self-inquiry, compassion, and the recognition of interdependence, Buddhism provides a timeless yet ever-evolving framework for navigating the complexities of modern existence. Whether one views it as a religious practice, a secular philosophy, or a form of psychological training, its core message remains clear. True liberation comes not from external authorities but from direct experience, ethical action, and inner wisdom. After diving into the heart of Buddhism, we return to the question, does Buddhism reject God? The answer, as we've discovered, is both simple and profound. Buddhism neither denies nor affirms the existence of a supreme deity. Instead, it shifts our focus from external worship to internal awakening. It reminds us that the answers we seek, whether about God, suffering, or enlightenment, are not found in the heavens but within our own hearts and minds. Through teachings like dependent origination, Buddhism invites us to understand the universe not as the creation of a singular being but as an intricate web of causes and conditions. The concept of divinity is reframed, no longer tethered to omnipotence or judgment but rooted in qualities like compassion, wisdom, and interconnectedness. And the celestial beings of Buddhist cosmology? They are not distant deities to be worshipped but fellow travelers, subject to impermanence and karma, just as we are. But the real power of Buddhism lies in its practicality. Instead of asking us to believe, it asks us to practice. Instead of urging us to worship, it invites us to awaken. And it does so with a profound simplicity that cuts through the noise of theological speculation. I teach only two things, the Buddha said, suffering, and the cessation of suffering. This focus on transformation over doctrine is what makes Buddhism so accessible, so universal, and so enduring. As we conclude, let's reflect on the Buddha's timeless advice: be a lamp unto yourself. This is more than a call for self-reliance, it's an invitation to take ownership of your spiritual journey. It's a reminder that the path to enlightenment begins with a single step inward, where you'll discover the clarity, strength, and wisdom you've carried all along. The Buddhist perspective on divinity challenges us to think beyond traditional ideas of God. It asks us to shift our gaze from the external to the internal, from the unknowable to the practical, and from faith to experience. In doing so, it offers a path that is not just spiritual but deeply transformative, a path that transcends boundaries of culture, belief, and tradition. So, whether you resonate with Buddhism's teachings as a philosophy, a religion, or a way of life, its message remains the same: liberation is within reach. The tools are in your hands. The journey is yours to take. Thank you for joining us today on Buddha's Odyssey, where we explore the timeless wisdom of the Buddha through the lens of the modern world. If this video inspired or intrigued you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into spirituality, mindfulness, and the mysteries of existence. As always, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, true wisdom begins with curiosity. See you next time.